It is my honor and privilege today to have for the very first time as a guest on Iron Sharpens Iron, Dee Dee Warren. As I said, she is considered by a lot of folks. In fact, almost everybody that I spoke to about the issue of hyper-preterism referred me to Dee Dee as being one of the foremost experts around on this issue. And we are going to hear about the websites that she owns and operates and contributes to. And especially we're going to hear about this very important subject that is growing in popularity, hyper-preterism. It's an honor and privilege to have you as a guest for the very first time, Dee Dee Warren.
Hi, thank you, Chris. It's an honor for me.
Well, before we even go into the discussion of hyper-preterism, that's the belief, among other things, that Jesus Christ will not return visibly and bodily in the future, and that the dead will not be raised from their graves in the future, and other things that you can bring up. But tell us about these websites that you own, operate, and contribute to, and of course we'll repeat the information throughout the program and towards the end of the program.
Sure, and usually when I do this, the people listening will think, wow, she does this, she's married, and I have a full-time job. The websites that I own or contribute to are, the main one is theologyweb.com. It's a very active theology debate forum where people from all points of view can come and debate. There are atheists, there are Christians, there are pagans. It's from any point of view whatsoever, because we believe that Christianity wins out in the marketplace of truth, and we will answer their claims there. That site has about 15,000 members and is very, very active. There's some very sharp people there. I also own preteristsite.com. That's been around for quite a bit. It started out simply as an index of resources for people who were struggling with hyper-preterism to go to, because when I was struggling with hyper-preterism, there wasn't anything like that. And while I was crying out to God, pretty much, why isn't anyone taking this on? Why isn't there anything like that? I felt the definite call that was, well, why don't you? And that's the call I've been answering ever since. I contribute to the Preterist blog with Roderick Edwards, who is a former hyper-preterist. He was a hyper-preterist for 15 years.
Yes, and he's been a guest on my program, as you know.
Yes, and what's really wonderful with Roderick and I were good friends while he was still a hyper-preterist. So I was talking to him throughout all those years, and it's the Holy Spirit that obviously convinced him, but he did say in some small part I had him at least starting to think and look in the right direction, and I'm just very grateful to have been used by God in that way. I also do a regular podcast, and that's at preteristpodcast.com. And right now, and have been for, I think we're up to episode 24 or so, I have been going exegetically through Matthew chapter 24, because I've written a commentary on that chapter. And as we go on, I'll start tackling some other issues, and so that people don't think that all I do is eat, sleep, and drink end times prophecy. I work as a legal assistant, and I am very interested in technology. I am a staff editor at World of Apple, and I'm an administrator at myapplespace.com. I'm also the host of their internet TV show.
Great. Well, if you could, other than or including what I just said, the very brief description of hyper-preterism, if you could give our listeners an outline of, first of all, what preterism is, Orthodox preterism. And, of course, there are probably some of our brothers and sisters who don't think there's any such thing as Orthodox preterism. But if you could give us an explanation of what Orthodox preterism is and what its aberrant imitator is, hyper-preterism.
Sure. And just to get this clear from the outset, I didn't start out believing in preterism. It's a point of view that I came to kicking and screaming. I was taught when I was a new believer as a dispensationalist, futurist dispensationalist. But, enough of that. Orthodox preterism believes that a great many, not all, a great many of the passages in the New Testament that the majority of Christians put off to the future did, in fact, refer to past events. The biggest distinguishing mark, I would say, is if you ask somebody, is the Great Tribulation future or past, and they say past, you're dealing with a preterist. Then you would have to ask additional questions to determine if you're dealing with an orthodox one or a heretical one. But that's the simple test, I would say. That if you believe the Great Tribulation is past, you're a preterist.
And what are some of the hallmarks of what hyper-preterism would be, which you and most other folks would consider to be heresy?
Hyper-preterism, they hold that the future bodily resurrection, well, that too, but let me start in order. The future bodily return of Christ, they deny that. They do not believe that Christ is ever coming back. They believe that his coming took place in the first century, and, you know, that's it for his coming.
AD 70 at the destruction of the temple, correct?
Correct, at the destruction of the temple. They also deny the future bodily resurrection of believers and non-believers, which also entails that they deny the future final judgment. And even more interestingly, errors don't live in isolation. So when you start to ponder what they believe, all of a sudden, all kinds of dominoes start falling down. They believe Satan is destroyed. They don't believe there are demons, so therefore they can't really believe in spiritual warfare.
Wow. And this is across the board?
Do you still take communion? The communion passage says you declare the Lord's death until he comes. And you just keep going on down the line, and it impacts nearly every facet of any doctrine.
Now, I'm assuming that they are not all in total unanimity. Are you saying that they all, or predominantly, most of them, do not even celebrate the ordinances anymore?
Some of them do, some of them do not. The ones that do have various ways of getting around the communion passage. So that, I would say, is probably 50-50. All of them believe that that Satan and the demons are gone.
All of them believe that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, wow.
They believe the book of Revelation is completely fulfilled.
Wow. Oh, so in other words, it's just man's sinful nature that is alone involved in the sin of this world today?
So they do not believe that they are battling, forces and principalities, as Paul says in Ephesians.
Now, I'm sure that the members within what is known as the Church of Christ, who are hyper-preterists, still are practicing baptism and the Lord's Supper. Those were the two of their hallmarks or badges of honor, if you will. The Church of Christ has always, the Campbellite movement, the Restoration movement, whatever you want to call it, has always put an emphasis and perhaps even an overemphasis on baptism and the Lord's Supper. Would most of those folks, like Max King and his followers, still be practicing baptism and the Lord's Supper?
I don't know of any hyper-preterist that does not practice baptism.
Oh, okay.
I know of some who do not practice communion. I know of quite a few that do not practice communion, but I also know of some that do.
Okay.
You know, the ones that don't point to that passage and say that was a first century ordinance. I think they are the more consistent ones within their belief.
Now, wouldn't you say that this is an ancient heresy resurrected because of the scriptural reference by Paul about those who believe and teach that the resurrection has already come?
Absolutely. Another, to me, valid name for this heresy, other than hyper-preterism, is Hymenaeanism. Unfortunately, a lot of Christians don't know their Bibles well enough to know who Hymenaeus was. The strange thing, and this kind of shocked me when I was a brand new believer, when you read through the New Testament, very few heresies are explicitly defined. There are many that are logical inferences, but there is only a very few that, like, it's outright, here it is on the table. And hyper-preterism is one of them. I mean, Paul explicitly states that those who say the resurrection is past are shipwrecking the faith of some. They're giving in to ungodly chatter and babble, and that they're a cancer. I really would not want to be called a cancer by Paul.
Yeah, so we cannot just view this as just an orthodox alternative of eschatology, just like most of us would agree there are Orthodox Christians who are all-mill, post-mill, pre-mill, historic pre-mill, pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib. We wouldn't say that they are not Christians or heretics because of those things alone. They might be heretics for other reasons. But because of those views of eschatology, we would not brand them heretics. But this is a totally different animal, isn't it?